All right. I want to thank you all for coming tonight to Lou Ellingham's 89th birthday. I wish that Lou could be here, but he is in spirit, and so this is, what is corporeality anyway, really? It's kind of a little bit overrated perhaps sometimes. We are going to have a few readers here. I'm going to let Larry Ackerman tell you about who will be speaking. My name is Patrick Marks, and I'm the proprietor of the Green Arcade. And I've had the pleasure of having a couple of Lou's birthday parties here. And also, I don't know, it was always a lot of fun. And so tonight, it's kind of a sad occasion, but it's also a happy occasion because it's so great to see you guys here. And I just wanted to show this is the picture of the man. And I think the last time I really hung with him when he was okay was down at the Embarcadero, and we had tacos at that great restaurant, which is now closed. But I've forgotten the name of it. So without further ado, Mr. Larry Ackerman.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I'm Larry Ackerman, and I was Lou's caregiver and friend and supporter the last few years. And I wanted to do something in his memory, and as Patrick mentioned, we'd had numerous birthday parties here, usually when he would release on his most current book, his latest annual book of poetry. So they were always a book release party and a birthday party, and it was fun. And I will be doing some reading, but first we'll have we'll have Jim Mitchell read, and I'd like each person, when they come up and present, to kind of indicate your connection to Lou and how you connected with him. And then we'll have John Meller. Yes, sorry. And Michael Flanagan. And I don't know, did you have something to read, Eric?
Very short.
Very short. Eric Sneeden, yes. So why don't we get started? And Jim, well, we're going to get a chair up here for Jim, so it'll take a minute.
All right, big guy.
Do you have to keep the mask on when I'm talking?
Oh, you can take the mask off when you're talking.
No, okay.
I'm sorry. You take your mask off.
My eye doctor warned me against reading in advance of a surgery that I'm having on Tuesday morning. So I thought what I'd do tonight, what I'd like to do in lieu of that, is explain to you how we came to publish Lou Ellingham's first book of poetry, something called The Birds, and our store manager has a copy, and I'm sure it's attractively priced and available for your purchase on the front desk as you leave, but not yet, please. The book is called The Birds, and what happened was the year is like, this appeared in 2010, and about 2008, I was looking for some interesting poets to publish. I started Ethereal Spear in 2005, and my friend Bruce Boone notified me that there was a poet in town whom I'd never heard of, who had written a lot of poems about birds, right? He was an enthusiastic bird watcher, right? The kind that get up at 4:30 in the morning and go out looking for birds to write down in their notebooks that they saw one of, you know. And he had made quite a science of this, traveling up and down the coast to look for exotic species that no one had heard of, particularly shorebirds, coastal birds. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting, you know, not having personally possessed the ability ever to write a poem about a bird. A good friend of mine has written some about snails, which I thought was wonderful, but I'm just not that kind of a guy. And anyway, so I called up Lou Ellingham at Bruce's suggestion and mentioned all this, you know, that we were looking for some interesting stuff to publish. He said, well, why don't you come on over? So that's how the relationship started. I went over to his house on 18th Street, and in the course of the discussion, he pulled out a cardboard box with about, I'd say upwardly of like several hundred pages of typed manuscripts of poems that had been written, right? And I said, oh my God, how are we going to proceed with this? I looked at some of it and realized it was quality writing and we should do something with it. I, at the time, was busy with a lot of other different projects. However, Francesca Rosa, whom I just established a working relationship with at that time, volunteered to help edit and produce out of some of these 2,000 pages something that resembled a book which would present, you know, sort of a survey of the kind of writing that Ellingham was capable of doing, right? And the reason this was a bit of a problem was that, you know, there's a biographical sketch in the back of this book, which is written by Lou himself, and it'll tell you that he was a member of what he called the Jack Spicer barroom circle, poets who used to meet in North Beach, Grand Avenue back in the day. And and Lou was completely taken by Jack Spicer, to the extent later in 1998 in publishing in collaboration with Kevin Killian, what's the title of it? Poet Be Like God. Poet Be Like God, that's right. And, you know, that was, and anyway, Lou was writing poetry already back then, but never thought particularly of you know, publishing it. And so it had just stacked up to a reasonable extent in his apartment on the 18th Street. So it was quite a problem figuring out how to sort it out and produce, you know, a reasonable introductory book, an introduction to his work, right? And later I began to understand that the reason that Lou writes the way he did is exactly due to Jack Spicer. And what you have to understand there, that I and he, I think, belong to a generation where you were taught that poetry was a kind of artifact that you studied, you know. And if you were a poet, you were going to, you know, you were going to write a poem, you know. And the Spicer approach was totally different, you know. With Spicer, poetry was more a process, you know, and not the production of some particular kind of poem. And I think this very much explains not only the problems we were facing at the time, but also how Lou approached poetry in general. And I think if you look at you know, what followed this book, the five or six self-published books, which were published legally by Ethereal Spear, but we weren't able to do it ourselves because we didn't have the resources. And first of all, this is really, really difficult nowadays to produce poetry books that are in the size that he wanted, which is 8.5 by 11. And in this, you know, in this demand, Lou was absolutely intractable. You know, it just had to be that way. And he's absolutely right. As circumstances developed, as you can see from the following books, it just absolutely had to be that way because he couldn't arrange the stuff he wanted to, as he did visually, in any lesser format. It simply wouldn't have worked. So anyway, we were the first. We weren't able to continue for lack of resources, but we were there 100% in trying to help out what he was doing. Um, mention very quickly, the reason this doesn't work for contemporary book publishing with small presses is because no bookstores, no self-respecting bookstore, except perhaps this one, is interested in carrying large size, oversized books. And they're a total pain in the ass to deal with if you've got a distributor. Even libraries don't like the size of them, you know. It's just like really hard, you know. So that's how we got going. And after this book was produced, you'll see that Lou, who had never published a book of poetry before, really adopted a whole new approach to his writing. And what he did is, he's one of these people, I believe, who got in the habit of writing a certain number of hours every single day. And his work is, it's like I say, all process in the sense that it's dated at certain dates and stuff like that. But you really see it's just a continuous thing that's going on and on and on. And I really do attribute that to and I've heard him say that that's, if it is a style, if we can say that, you know, it was attributed to his veneration, let's say, or his influence by Jack Spicer. That doesn't mean his poetry is the same as Jack Spicer, far from it. What he eventually developed was sort of a diaristic or journalistic way of writing about the day's events, you know, interspersed with all sorts of cultural allusions to books that he'd been reading lately, articles, heaven knows what, newspapers, you know, anything at all. And then outbreaks of sudden lyricism for some reason or other. Plenty of citations in foreign languages. He tells you in his biographical sketch that he went to college somewhere, a Jesuit college in Wisconsin, and got thrown out of there for being drunk on his birthday, which doesn't seem too terribly harmful, but apparently it was viewed otherwise by the school administration. At which point he got a small inheritance and went off to Europe for 3 or 4 years. And he learned languages pretty well, too. He's reasonably good at German, French, Spanish. Latin was verblungent, but everything else was pretty good as far as modern, languages in Europe. And you'll see all sorts of quotes from all over the place in his writing. So what you get is a kind of melange, you know, of these various themes, which I mentioned, you know, but all is centered in sort of a journalistic sort of way about like, this is, you know, what happened today or this week and so forth and so on. This book started the whole thing off, I guess, for him, and I'm very happy that was the case. And I have to, the editing process was very harrowing experience for both Francesca and Lou, but eventually they got on speaking terms again after about 3 or 4 year hiatus after the publication of the book. And meanwhile, of course, Lou went off in the directions that you see very clearly in these more recent books that he published himself. And I guess that's all I need to say about that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
You can do that back.
You all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Excuse me, John.
Hi there, my name's John Miller, and I love the big books. They dominate the shelves. It's like, there's Lou, he sent me all his books, so I have this whole block of Lou's books, which I love. Just quickly jotted down a few comments here. I met Lou under rather miraculous circumstances around the year 2010. From the first time we met, we fed each other material and inspiration and corresponded nearly daily. We met often for walks and birding adventures. coffee and food. And a lot of times strolling around Dolores Park or around the Castro neighborhood and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's great. Looking back over the emails of the past 11 years of our friendship, I think we first met around 2010. There may be over 1,000 messages between us. He always answered me. And Lou helped me with my writing, making it basically into a daily practice similar to yoga, where, that was the whole point of it, was just to write and express ourselves. He helped me edit my book, Blood Every Day. It's smaller than his books. And he wrote the blurb for the back. It makes me also happy to see the inspiration of our friendship in his work as well. I could see it throughout his books. Lou's exit from my life and into the other world is a loss beyond measure. I consider him one of my best friends. So I'd like to read just a couple of his poems and maybe a couple of mine as well. This is from Black Sand. It's called The Stroller. Somebody has abandoned a baby buggy outside the closed door of 19th Auto Body Center at a very busy trolley car stop. The sliding door of the car repair shop is down. The business not open yet on this Sunday morning. A large plastic container, a laundry washing object, plastic and white, rests on the sidewalk by the abandoned stroller. Empty? At this distance, impossible to tell. People pass it, people glance at it. A few waiting for the trolley. No one seems seriously interested in it. The carry-all under the baby seat is open, the cover hanging loosely, abandoned. An abandoned set of objects. Was there ever a baby? Maybe the baby is dead, murdered. Or the adult responsible for the baby, dead, murdered. Part of the urban detritus, abandoned, just sitting there. When the car repair shop opens, someone will move all this. Maybe the story will continue. Within the shop, connected to someone who works there, or the owner, or owners. Maybe there is no connection. The baby, the pusher of the stroller, will be found dead, murdered in the shop. The workers horrified. Somebody knows about this. A devastating tale. Horrible. Horrible. There are churches nearby. There is stylish graffitio on the sliding door of the car shop. Unreadable, huge letters. Well done. Above it, in large blue capital letters, the word estimates. Above the door, the wall is some boring beige. The whole building is. So I really love his, way of seeing reality, from a different kind of perspective of just normal everyday life. And I could always very much relate to that. This is the last poem in the book. It's called Footprints. Footprints, deep dug from a racing, jumping dog, and barefoot people, more in shoes, the soul's pattern. Do I wish to see, to have present within me some image of any of this living affection? Is the absence of my actual interest away from touch and feelings, the longings there are in life, the punctured sand empty, holding the imprints of what was? The shimmer of the glistening sea, the waterlogged granules holding foam, the soul's pattern. What once was the shimmer of the glistening sea, a long wave, the breakup of the image, suds foaming over what was. There are imprints higher up, drier sand, scatterings, twigs, and littler stuff. Let's call that cigarette paper and oleander petal. That crumpled littleness, a seed pod from yet higher turf, until there was nothing to imagine but the endless surf. It's pretty great. And I'll just read a few from my book here. Like the wino raises his bag as the day begins, I want to forge my own bonds with the ancients. Providence placed a copy of John Stuart Mill's autobiography in my hands from out of the closet on university for $1. The least I can do is read it. My discerning reader might reckon that I've already started it. Like Hermes, I choose not to engage Leto in battle. I don't feed the animal. Beautiful dream like a lucky ant that changes course and reaches the open box of cookies well before her sisters. Occasion has me in the tenderloin, murder in the smell of piss, a down and outer in every doorway. I'll straighten my back now and pull my hands from my pockets. It is fucking cold, but according to that big moon above the Sunset District, the tide is flooding. Jimmy Ray drank diesel, all fucked up in the breezeway again. Euripides asleep, wakes up, looks out, and rushes back to sleep. I love you too, Pentheus, but you are stupid to try and fight a god. Wharf poem, fugacity, a fleeting quality. Lenny's dead, ain't that sad? A cock crows, you can hear it from on the mountain. Face washed with spit, ears laced, eyes wiped, head is bad. The throttle trains the hand. The throttle trains the hand. The palm checks the fingers. Is there any way forward through this labyrinth of dreams? But Uncle Lou, what if the Vera Vox spits at us with vituperative tongue and with an unmixed clearness? Or is it not often thus? Okay, that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
I have been instructed to go next, so I'm here. I'm going to sit down so we don't have to move the microphone, if that's all right. Oh, I should take this off. Okay. We want to see the mustache. Okay, great. Here's the mustache. I just have one poem to read, but with your indulgence, I'm going to read it twice. I socialized with Lou only a couple times. I met him at one of his release readings. Maybe it was the one for The Birds. I don't remember. But of course, after the reading, Kevin Killian brought me over and was like, "You must meet Lou Ellingham, the wonderful, wonderful Lou Ellingham." And so I did, and I bought his book, and he signed it for me. And we arranged, I don't know, some kind of coffee date or something. Maybe we met in Dolores Park. But whatever it was, we met, we exchanged poetry. I gave him one of my chapbooks. And he sent me this poem sometime later. And the first, 4 lines are from one of my poems. There's a stanza of his work. Then he inserts a poem of Emily Dickinson's, and then he concludes with his own work. All right, well, I'm just going to read this poem and then maybe say a little bit more. Begins. Tell me to listen to the moon, my pale heart, what a father we might make. It's after Christmas, I reassess all that's traditional or just old in my life, like a father dead these 50 years, more really, little known. We learn in the retreating how vast in one was recently among us, a perished son. Endear in the departure how doubly more than all the golden presence it was before. To see a father in a lover where a choice is made rather than the ghost who hovers, covers like the moon and sun a winter flower, a shadow of some color or not. And one of the things I found so extraordinary about this exchange is it felt very San Francisco. One, to just come across by chance this quirky bit of really deep history, and suddenly you're just kind of thrown into what this city has been for so long. And then it kind of reappears on the page as it does here, where, words that I've written privately for myself are suddenly kind of getting scrambled together with Lou's, and then with, the immortal words of Emily Dickinson kind of all in one go. It felt like the kind of bizarre, exciting things that I came to San Francisco to experience and kind of be a part of. So it was really exciting to kind of have that come back. Jim was talking earlier about Lou's kind of diaristic style of writing poetry. And when I was working with Larry, you could really see this play out in like just the catalogs of his material. He just kept these day books where everything from a particular day or week was like stapled together or paperclipped together. And so you could imagine those days, those catalogs, as kind of like the raw material that he would turn into those poems. And it's interesting to kind of think about that material having a future, in an institution and ending up in an archive where somebody else gets to decide, should those papers stay together in those configurations, or should they be re-scrambled or reorganized in some other fashion, how little control over that we all have, what happens to the matter of us. But also what a gift that it continues to kind of be propelled forward. So thank you, Larry, for kind of bringing me into that project of preserving Lou's memory. I'm going to just read the poem one more time and just, again, say thank you. Tell me to listen to the moon, my pale heart, what a father we might make. It's after Christmas I reassess all that's traditional or just old in my life, like a father dead these 50 years, more really little known. We learn in the retreating how vast and one was recently among us, a perished son. Endear in the departure how doubly more than all the golden presents it was before. To see a father in a lover, where a choice is made rather than the ghost who hovers, covers like the moon and sun, a winter flower, a shadow of some color or not. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michael Flanagan. I am a writer for the Bay Area Reporter. I write a history column called Barchive. And after all of this poetry today, I am your prose anchor here. So I knew Lou over a decade. I actually read Lou before I met him. I read Poet Be Like God, and Kevin Killian introduced me to Lou probably around 2008 or 2009. There were several events in town that were associated with North Beach and with readers, and I would see Lou there. I also came to the birthday parties here, so thank you. And I'm also a librarian, and I am one of the people who struggled with libraries to get Lou's books into the library that I work at. And what I'm going to read for you is Lou was an incredible source of history. And I think that it's important that while we're remembering his artistic ability, that we also remember that he was anchored in San Francisco all the way back to the 50s. And when I would ask him something about Gino and Carlos, or about Jack Spicer, or about various bars in North Beach, he invariably had a story for me. So I'm going to read to you from a piece that I have here that I wrote in 2019 called Harry Parch at Opus. And it's about Opus 1, which was a bar in North Beach, which was a classical music bar, which was also a gay bar. Although when you read things about Opus 1, you would not know that it was a gay bar today. So talking to Lou was part of the journey that I made in discovering about Opus 1. And the subtitle is How an Iconoclastic Composer Performed in 1950s San Francisco Gay Bar. Opus and Closed. A question remained for me regarding Opus 1. Was it really a gay bar? The bar was featured in the Chronicle often, where it was referred to as a classical music venue that was unique, unusual, and European. Aside from these coded terms, the bar seemed to pass at a time when other gay bars were being put out of business. There's a reference to the bar in the 1960 convention papers of the Daughters of Bilitis as a gay bar with classical music, but no other contemporary gay references. The only mention of police in relation to the bar is a 1957 mention in a Chronicle column saying the police heard piano playing in the club after hours and discovered Pippin, that's Donald Pippin from the Pocket Opera, practicing Beethoven. They stayed through 2 movements. I asked the poet Louis Ellingham, who moved to San Francisco in 1954, if he went to the bar and if it was gay. Yes, it was my hangout, Ellingham replied. I lived for a while in Berkeley and came over every weekend to hang there. The owners were Win Aston and Don Pippin, both gay. Sunday nights were Pippin's concerts. The crowd mostly musical with many gays. Otherwise, it was gay all the time. As I recall, it wasn't open in the daytime, at night until 2 a.m. Beer and wine. We all socialized a lot. I met a lover there. Though he didn't attend the Parch concerts, he did know Parch. I spent a night on Harry Parch's houseboat in Sausalito and vaguely remember him talking into the dawn. We must have come from the Opus 1, but I was so drunk I have no clear impressions. So that's the type of material that Lou would impart to me. And oftentimes when there was nobody else who could talk to me about that era, he was somebody that I could go to. And that's something that will be truly missed. Thank you.
Lou's final book, Selections from the Writings of Louis Ellingham, arrived on the day of his death. He did, I was able to get a proof version to him earlier, and he read it and he was pleased. He said it's good. So I thought I'd read a few selections from this book, and then if we still have time, I kind of have a 10-minute obituary, the history of his life, which is I found so fascinating and so educational. Convergence. Convergence, a full moon, a clear sky to see it, the 4th of July, a black guy, totally naked, except for shoes, I've been seeing all week, an explosion of fireworks in Dolores Park. It's a mix to savor, some flavor to relish, as much because of its rarity as its tiny surprises. The guy walks alone. I've seen him before in daylight, once with another black guy, also totally naked except for shoes, both with long dicks. But tonight, alone and in the dark, except for the moments he's caught in passing car lights or the light in some house he's passing. All it takes is the ticking of a clock to move one into the past, eventually to strip away the skin, to become an ancestor, then fade into that jumble of lies we accept as the truth. That mix of swamp and ocean that is too ruffled for scum to form. Just indications, like floatings of debris from too far away. Birds that should be elsewhere. Something that is so far out of place, one cannot ignore it. That's the it I care about. The it that will likely forever be a wanderer. Emergency. The time has come, dragging my wheelie to Molly Stone's and back, the challenge of which proved to be the case when a woman took me by the arm and gently but firmly guided me to my apartment building. SF Paratransit, which only allows for one purchase of its services per month, isn't what I need now, but something for all time. I hope the option isn't an old people's home. Their residents have only one another and staff as company, although I have a little more now that I think of it. Most of the residents, old, very old, or disabled in some way. We all die. If we think about it at all, we die in our sleep or some other benign way. The trouble is getting there, to the hospital for the last spasm. Or maybe we die elsewhere. The difficulty is the same, getting there, the year or two or more of nastiness. This is an emergency, nothing less. If my last years are awful, and they are, others likely are going through the same thing. Raise a shout. That's the least you can do. A horse with no name. Bones scream, cover me. The ropes of feeling, trashing. Cover the heat-starved places. Do it. Seeking softness, seeking warmth. A spider warning the sacroiliac, curling new shapes. Hide me from the cold. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rings. Garish twists, spiderweb, a do-it world of control. Bones scream, cover me. The ropes of feeling, thrashing. The sky with no clouds. The heat was hot, and the ground was dry, but the air was full of notions, wanting names, starbursts of confusion. Just yield, obey. In the desert, you can remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. Sheathing, cushions, what would break? Stars melt into color. The story it told of a river that flowed made me sad to think it was dead. Pulse, muscle, blood, quiet, the center of the web. The ocean is a desert with its life underground and a perfect disguise above. The color of the star is sea. Some of those phrases were taken from A Horse with No Name song written by Dewey Bunnell, 1971. Fading photographs. Fading photographs, those in color, quicker to go than black and whites, but both fading. If I didn't know them so well, I could make little of them, some of them even now, one in particular, really lost. Sent me years ago, I guess by my twin sister, who has been dead 20 years, of my father's and my stepmother's graves, the headstone, a low elevation, Ellingham, and the paired flat granite slabs with tops, even with the grassy lawn. My stepsister bending over her mother's grave, placing large bouquets, peonies in one, blossoms a bit smaller in another, bunched like florists do it. A third, dripping like roses, and the mature woman who is someone I remember and last saw only as a teenage girl so long ago, the late 1940s, bending to attend another bouquet. I can hardly remember her, just her face and the dated hairdo and the stature. She's short, like her mother, but shorter. Well, she couldn't be alive now. I have no idea even how to look her up, what her married name was. I heard she spent her life in Florida. Divorced? Went to Maryland. Fragments, like photos. There are trees in the distance, a building, and I recall once a more complicated scene. Other graves, other family headstones. Lake Michigan in the far horizon, just a hint of it, a strip of blue. There are 5 black and whites above my head. In cheap frames I place them in, decades by and by. A young man in Dubrovnik in 1958, 3 of him. A lover's early picture from whenever before I knew him, maybe the 1960s. Another lover with me in our apartment in 1963, probably. The huge painting on the wall as background, no longer recognizable. I know what it is. I sold it 50 years ago, and it's still with the now old woman who has had it since that time. Other parts of the interior decor. I just showed the outside of the building to a friend whose father, my lover, and I had received there in the summer of 4 Harwood Alley. Even the street name has been changed to Bob Kaufman Place, a beatnik poet long, long dead. Other than myself, no one in the photographs is likely to be still alive. The images themselves are almost gone. I've written summary information on the backs of them for my estate, I suppose, or maybe for me when I have trouble remembering. These cherished objects, perfect in themselves. I think I'm going to skip that one. He is sitting on a ledge. He is sitting on a ledge of an apartment building at first, just someone, maybe a maintenance worker for the well-kept-up California Spanish apartments behind him, but then clearly not so. A young man in short sleeves, matched by casual clothing. He is shivering. The day would be warm, but the morning overcast is not yet burned away. If he's been here any time, any length of time, he will be chilled. I nearly pass by him and surprise myself by blurting, "You're cold." He nods and smiles and stands. Something forces me into bluntness. "Have you been living like this for long?" "A week." Then he looks away and says, "Longer." I feel myself intensely aware of him. I praise his face, his body, his manner, in glances maybe silently. I don't remember. Is it physical attraction? Yes, a bit, but stronger, flooding in a way my feelings from sympathy to shock. Empathy, something I seldom let pass without. Slowing to an almost halt, maybe his tentative face. Returning his eyes to my face, actually, I have emotional trouble. Interrupting, "Aren't there social agencies?" "Of course." And pausing, a facial tension, forcing him to continue looking at me. I'm on the waiting list. It's so long. SSI, I break in, attempting to establish the intimacy of shared knowledge, understanding. Yes, relaxing slightly and then shuddering, a chill, anxiety, a waft of self-censure perhaps, an early moral code. Don't use this scene. Let him know as I reach into my pants pocket and pull out the paper cash I carry, removing 2 single-dollar bills, handing them to him. His smile is huge. He understands. 2 gay men in the gayest part of San Francisco, one older by a lot. This is courtesy, not an edge toward. I cross the street to a cafe, my destination. Buy coffee, settle at an outside table. A familiar routine, glancing to where we have been. He is not there. So, anyway.
Larry, there's no problem with time.
Okay. So, I think I timed this at about 10 minutes. It's abbreviated history. A lot of times I just had to drag information out of Lou. He didn't volunteer his story. Fortunately, I did a bunch of videotaping or interviewing him, but I haven't done anything with it. It's now included in his archives. But the first time I remember meeting Lou was soon after the 1991 death of his boyfriend, Ralph Carpenter. It was a dinner hosted by Ralph's 23rd Street housemates, my friends Michael and Noe. Over the years, our paths would cross occasionally, but around 2010, we met more frequently, usually for coffee at Thoroughbred on Church Street. He began to ask for my assistance with creating covers for his annual book of poetry. Then he asked me to take some of the photos for the covers. I also started helping him submit the books to lulu.com, where he self-published and where they're still available. In 2020, he was limited in his cognitive skills due to progressive dementia. So I, with the help of Charles Hibbard, his former local birding friend, now living in Minneapolis, assembled Lou's final book. He was able to see the proof copy, as I mentioned, and was happy with it. Lou was born February 27, 1933 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Lou was educated in Catholic schools because his mother, who died when he was 2 years old, was Catholic. His father, an executive at Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette newspaper owned by his father and was a Democratic Party leader, was not Catholic. And he remarried when Lou was a teenager. He was raised mostly by his grandmother and then his stepmother, who had a difficult time with teenage Lou. I can imagine. Lou attended St. Patrick's Grade School, grades 1 to 8, then Jesuit Campion High School in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. As Jim mentioned, he got kicked out for drinking on his 18th birthday, which was perfectly legal in Wisconsin. His father threatened to sue, but nothing ever came of it. Lou traveled throughout Europe with Louis Hall Gordon, a professor of Dante, Italian, and medieval Italian. He met Gordon at Indiana University after his high school graduation in 1951. Lou was given a gift of a Renault Dauphine car and traveled in all departments of France, much of Spain, Portugal, and Italy, and spent a summer in Florence. He went to Europe by himself in 1960. There's one quote that I really liked about a trip to Egypt, and he said, "The mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, built at Luxor for the 18th dynasty queen and pharaoh. I walked there with my brother and his lover from the Nile one morning, a trip of a few miles. It's one of the greatest experiences of my life." Lou opened a bar with friends, possibly Fred Ranovic's, near the University of Chicago on 55th Street in Hyde Park called Jimmy's. And it was as an adjunct with a door to a theater space for the comedians Elaine May and Mike Nichols in the mid-50s or early 50s. Some of the dates got very confusing. Lou followed his twin sister Mary Margaret Ellingham to Berkeley probably in 1954 and took courses there but did not get a degree. Then she and her daughter Michaela Crociani and son Giancarlo lived in Fort Bragg, then moved to Italy, and she died there in about 1990. At some point, she was at the University of Colorado. Louis is survived by his niece and nephew who live in Milan, Italy. I've been in contact with Lou's niece, Michaela, and she really wanted to be with us here today. And a few hours ago, I had an email. She said, "Oh, it's already 11:30. I can't stay up till 4 a.m. to watch this live, but I will watch it on Monday." So Lou's older brother, Michael Anthony Ellingham, died in Bologna, aged 30, in 1959, while touring Europe with his boyfriend. In the early 1960s, Russell Fitzgerald, Marilyn Hatcher, and Lou edited early editions of the publication City in New York City. But then Lou settled in North Beach, as has been mentioned, in a world centered in bars, odd jobs, and the group of poets and painters dominated by Jack Spicer. For him, it would remain the same cultural world, the leading influences eventually being Bob Gluck's writing classes and his efforts as a Spicer biographer, culminating in prose in a book that he co-authored with Kevin Killian, Poet Be Like God. And I have a 1995 date on that, so all these varying dates are a bit confusing. The Jack Spicer circle of friends was centered around Gino and Carlos Bar in North Beach, and Lou often slept in the basement. Spicer and friends were the drinkers, while Ginsberg, Orlovsky, and friends were the marijuana devotees. According to Samuel Delaney, it was known at the time as the house that Jack built, even years after Jack Spicer's death. The bar was known. Lou worked for the Sierra Club, editing their publications in the 60s. He edited Not Man Apart, a book of photos by Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, and others with Robinson Jeffers' poetry under the direction of David Brower. It was a long commute to Carmel. He often lived in Marin County at this time, in and around Bolinas, sometimes sleeping in a field. Sometime in, excuse me, sometime in 1980 or 1981, Lou decided that it was time to stop drinking alcohol. He participated in an atheistic agnostic AA group where he met Ralph Carpenter, and they became boyfriends, lovers, often hiking and camping in the Sierra Mountains. Ralph lived at a jointly owned, well-known house of gay men on 23rd Street, just up the hill from SF General Hospital, that frequently hosted hot tub parties in the late 70s and 80s. And they were wonderful. Many well-known gay men attended. But sadly, Ralph died of AIDS in 1991. Lou was friends with many people. Some of them have been mentioned tonight. They included Joanne Kiger and Donald Gurovich, Robert Duncan, Robin Blazer, George Stanley, Alvin William Moore Brodecki, Bruce Boone, Marilyn Hacker, Samuel Delaney, Bob Gluck, Helen Adams, Kevin Killian, James Mitchell, and painter Paul Anderson. Lou compiled interviews with many people about Jack Spicer, mostly doing those interviews in the 80s, I believe. And it totaled over 1,000 pages and has not been published. People have asked me about that. We'll see. He gave the manuscript to Kevin Killian, and it was edited down and published as Jack Spicer, Poet Be Like God. In addition to the years of writing, he has several unpublished novels and possibly a play. Lou did years of genealogy research and has several bound books of that work. And since 1989, Lou lived at 3850 18th Street, a building of apartments for elders and disabled people, in a studio apartment, paying only 30% of his Social Security income. He was proud to live entirely on government payments. He made friends there in the building, and they dearly miss him. His love of nature led him to birding, and there's a whole nother community of friends. Only a few of them I've met. And he was truly shaken by the early death of his friend and supporter, Kevin Killian, in 2019. Since 2010, Lou self-published 14 books of poetry, mostly centered on life in San Francisco and his acute observations of people and nature. Until 2020, he wrote nearly every day. He even wrote last August while he was at the San Francisco Rehab and Health Center in his last days. And I've transferred his archives to the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, and they just picked them up last Thursday. I miss Lou. He was my best man at my 2014 wedding to Eric Michael Morin, and was my confidant and supporter during my difficult and good times with Eric Michael until Eric died in October 2020. The poem that Lou wrote about that moment is not entirely factually correct, but it's representative of the moment. I will miss his questions about the birds I see at my mountain cabin. I will miss his total acceptance and trust of me. My life is so much richer having had him in my life. Thank you, Lou.
Thank you. Thanks for taking care of the archive, too. That's a really important legacy. Would anybody else like to say anything tonight, or Patrick? Please come on up. Introduce yourself.
Oh no, my mask is stuck. Okay, good. Okay. So I am Patrick Miller. I'm John's brother. I met Lou at the same time that John did, at a very difficult period of my life. And my friendship with Lou was more episodic and less consistent than John's was. And I will say that without Lou, I never would have written my own book. And I definitely credit Lou for helping me to see that what I was writing, what I was doing when I was writing, was part of a common process that it included what he was doing, and also our dad, who he knew for a short period of time, also wrote. And I'm just going to read something that he sent me in 2018, and then 3 of my poems, 2 of them older, 2 of them from 2011, and then 1 of them from last year, that express how I would hope he would appreciate being remembered on his birthday. Socrates went to the dithyrambs with some of their own most elaborate passages, asking their meaning, but got a response of, "Will you believe me?" which showed me in an instant that not by wisdom do poets write poetry, but by a sort of genius and inspiration. They are like diviners or soothsayers who also say many fine things, but do not understand the meaning of them. Late February is the blooming time for one of Japan's iconic trees, ume, the Japanese flowering plum. My birthday is February 27th. In San Francisco, the ume is a common street and garden tree. They have come to a marriage in my mind. The plum's origins are actually Chinese, and in Japan the species is more closely related to apricots than plums. The fruit is eaten widely in Asia, a question of focus and editing visually. We squint to focus, edit out the passing cars, or include the upturned temple corner, the passing streetcar, the metaphors accumulating for instant total effect. A sort of genius and inspiration, like diviners or soothsayers. When everything has faded, they alone shine forth, encroaching on the charms of smaller gardens. Their scattered shadows fall lightly on clear water. Their subtle scent pervades the moonlit dusk. Snowbirds look again before they land. Butterflies would faint if they but knew. Thankfully, I can flirt in whispered verse. I don't need a sounding board or wine cup. The arena of echo, the memory of wind. What would that I could, all told, recite the names of God 14 times in all permutations. Would that I could effect the movement of the wheel, forbearing the spoke to lamina, given to all in all. Would that I can see, sing, warm, open-scented, I not tyranny of generation, that I will, that I can hold and stabilize the movement. Arcturus open, heat blows red from the fire. Hold us, warm us. by the drying rushes, in lamplight and the lamp smell, it is seen, it has been seen. Dig and scrape shell upon baked clay, it is seen. Sol mirrored and pouring from the ground, river adjacent sunk in its bed. Squat and scrape, fetch a stick, the stick sweat polished, wood sprung and translucent. May the ground rise up to meet your feet, soles wet with light. Hear meaning, intention. Take it. Love is all. To be granted, all bright, in my own estimation, my flooding perception, my fears erased, my will given willingly, freely to trust the discerning eye of light in fires seen, and ripples passing through my vision flash hot on the face, their traces whisper solar winds. And falling back, agile, taut bow curved in time, I orient such that soul rising, framed clear in the arc, breaks across the center line. And the dart inscribed by soul bisected, the double angle so described, by cord pulled back against the sky, glides centripetal, and the earth flowing up my feet opens my voice to fletch the shaft. My song resonates with the string. Released, arms open, we face the star. Dear friend, take the bow, sing the sun, lift with me the world wing. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much, and eat, drink, and be merry, as they say. Let us carry on. Thank you.